Hi, I'm Peter Rowlett.
And I'm Katie Steckles. And Peter, what is today's mathematical object?
So today's mathematical object is a Superegg, which is a mysterious thing I know nothing about. So we have a very special guest to tell us all about it. Hi, Hannah.
It's Easter themed-ish, depending on when you're listening to this. If it's around Christmas, it's, I don't know, Christmas sweet themed.
So what's a Superegg?
Okay, so I'm going to come to the Superegg in a moment. But first, I want you to imagine that you are in Stockholm in Sweden. It's the middle of the last century. And there's a particular town planning problem that needs solving. So lots of like old sort of ugly post-war buildings have been demolished. And they've left this great big sort of rectangular space. This kind of right in the centre of a town, like a town square, but rectangular. And everybody wants to build something very beautiful in the middle of it. But this rectangle is also where a lot of the traffic flows through the city in different directions. So there's kind of this little battle between some people want a roundabout, some people want there to be something beautiful in the middle. And then no one can quite decide what to do, because if you just build a sort of rectangular park in the centre, then it's got these really ugly corners, which aren't that great for traffic, loads of intersections, it's kind of a bit of a problem. But if you have a roundabout right in the centre, I mean, that's also like sort of a bit of a weird space. It's just, you know, you're not sort of maximising the opportunity for nice, beautiful monument in the centre of this rectangle. Also, if you use an ellipse, that wouldn't work either, right? Because ellipses, you sort of got, you know, it's quite pointy at the ends, terrible for traffic. So everyone's really has no idea what to do. Luckily, though, they have someone on hand, an architect called Pete Hine, who is also a recreational mathematician. And Pete Hine, this is from his website, right? He has some thoughts about squares and circles. Some of these thoughts are quite deep, and they're very architectural. Don't know if you've ever had a long chat with an architect, but this is generally the way that they talk. Here's what he said. He said, cars are on circular wheels, guided by hands on circular steering wheels. They move along the streets that intersect like the lines on a rectangular lattice. Buildings and houses are made up of mostly right angles, relieved occasionally by circular domes and windows. What is the simplest and most pleasing closed curve that mediates fairly between these two clashing tendencies? Which is a very beautiful way to get us to the solution, which is, of course, a squircle, right? And that...
Right.
Which is a very ugly word for a beautiful thing that you've just described.
I'm quite into the squircle. I quite like the idea of a squircle. So a squircle is essentially a rounded rectangle or a squarey circle. So it's got this really nice equation. If you imagine the equation of a circle is x squared plus y squared equals 1.
Yep.
If you increase the power on x and y to do, I don't know, x to the 8 plus y to the 8 equals 1, actually what you end up seeing is this sort of rounded shape at the edges pushes itself out to make it more square-like. In fact, if you had x to the infinity, or x to the n as n tends to infinity, thank you. I saw Katie's look at me. I forgot who I was talking to for a moment there. Forgive me. I've been doing too much stuff with the BBC for too long. If you raise it to a power of n and let n tend to infinity, then it would indeed become much more like a square. So this is something that is known essentially as a Lamé curve. So it's a circle, but rather than raised to the power of 2, it's raised to the power of just an exponent that you can choose a number for. And this is what Pete Hine settled on. He decided that the most beautiful exponent that you could use was 2.5. And he started off with an ellipse. So he had x and y had different denominators and created this beautiful solution. And you can see it now in the square. I mean, this is going to be number one on my list of tourist attractions. Swedish-based mathematical tourist attractions.
Yep.
But actually, this curve, this shape that you end up with, the squircle, or the superellipse as it's also known, it has found a home in lots of different places. So in the Olympic Stadium in Mexico City, the 1968 Azteca Olympic Stadium, the shape of that is a superellipse. Also, possibly my favourite, also in the 1960s, when people were negotiating about the Vietnam War, no one could quite agree on what shape the negotiation table should be. Because, of course, if it's round, you're sort of implying that everybody is equal and, I don't know, big egos get in the way of that. But also, if it's rectangular, then it's just two kind of, one side dominating the other. So they went for a squircle. And I think that it was by laughing over the name of the table that everything finally resolved. That's the alternative history that I believe
That
in.
is what would happen. You're like, what is this? What is this shape called? Yeah, it's like the at the nail place where I get my nails done, they've got like a sheet with all the different shapes you can get the end of your nail file to, and like it's got like round and square, and there's some really weird, there's like a diagonal one as well.
Sure.
And one of them is called Squoval. And every time I see it, it winds me up. I'm like, that's not what that's called. What even is that shape? But yeah, it's sort of like that kind of cross between a square and a round thing. But it's not the same as, because there's a shape that people often, this is literally one of the questions I often get asked as a mathematician, what is this shape called? That is so often the thing that people come to me with. And the thing that is like a rectangle with a semicircle stuck on each end.
Oh, what is that shape called?
It's called, and I had to look this up, and every time people ask me now I know, it's called a stadium.
Is it?
Yeah.
So hang on a second then. So actually the squoval, because I was sort of thinking in my head that maybe the squoval was actually a superellipse, and now you know the equation for it, and you can go in and cross out their poster
Well, it could be, yeah.
and write the equation of a Landmay curve on it. But maybe actually it's more like a squadium.
Oh, maybe.
It depends how long the nail is.
Yeah. Well, I'll get a picture. Next time I'm in, I'll take a photo of it and do some analysis on the actual shape and determine what it is. But now I'm armed with the knowledge of Landmay curves. I can see whether it's one of these.
You're totally welcome. I also I'm joining you on my Mac today, and on the bottom of a Mac, you know the little icons that you have running along the bottom, all squircles. They use these super ellipses. That's the they have done for a number of years. It's just a very pleasing shape.
Yeah, so is it like a rounded rectangle?
Yeah.
But I guess you can use the maths to determine how close to the edge the corner comes in.
Yeah, exactly. So the higher the power of the exponent, the more cornery it goes. My object, though, so I'm not actually bringing in a Vietnam War negotiation table or a Olympic stadium or even a Apple Mac icon or a roundabout. I'm actually bringing in a Superegg, which is all of these ideas but raised to an extra dimension. So the Superegg, this was a very popular executive toy in the 1960s that's based on the Squircle. It's a solid of revolution, basically, which is what you would get when you take an elongated superellipse and you rotate it around. So if you slice it through in one direction, all you get are circles. If you slice it through in the other direction, you get your Squircle. Just the more times I can say it, the better.
Yeah.
And the really pleasing thing about this is because it's flatter at either end than an ellipse would be, it means that it stands really nicely upright, which I can't demonstrate because of my camera angle, and you can drop it. But you can also stack them, which I think is why it was a particularly pleasing elongated toy.
That's fun.
Now, when I got this particular Superegg, as it's known, I decided to really go in the Pete Hine way of things. So it's actually a Pete Hine Superegg. And because it's Pete Hine, this is not just any Superegg. What I have done is I've got one that is made of amethyst. And I should tell you that the stone in this is associated with the Pisces zodiac sign. This is from his website. And it says that amethyst has a calming influence on your heart and nerves and enhances concentration. And an amethyst under your pillow gives you an easy sleep and protects you against nightmares. Presumably, unless you are a princess, in which case anything under your mattress will be extremely uncomfortable.
It's a lot bigger than a pea. Yeah.
I should also tell you that my daughters found my Superegg, not realising that it was an amethyst with special magical powers, and I've been chucking it around as though it was a marble, and so it's all cracked.
Oh no! Does that make it more or less powerful?
I am going to go less.
Okay. Excellent. I feel like mathematically I'm now inquisitive. So you've got powers. If you square both the terms, you get a circle or a ellipse, I guess. If you go higher than 2, you get squircles. What happens if you make the exponents smaller?
So if you go between 1 and 2, you end up with a bit like a rhombus.
Okay.
Except that it's got sort of outwards curved sides. And then if you go below 1, then you get sort of a star-like shape. So it's almost like if you take your standard squircle and you take the outsides and then you flip them inwards towards the centre.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You end up with a sort of star shape.
So you've got the same points on each side, but you've just got a concave curve pointing to
Exactly.
on each side.
Yeah.
Every time you say concave and convex, Peter, do you imagine in your head going in the cave?
Well, I just had to think about it and think, what did my physics teacher tell me about concave and convex mirror? Oh yeah, that's right, concave, that's it.
Yeah.
It just happens in a moment, doesn't it? But you have that little hesitation.
I'm exactly the same. I defy anybody to know them instinctively. I think it's...
Yeah, I'm the same with stalagmites and stalactites.
Oh, every time. Which one hangs on?
Tights hang down. That's how you remember.
And this is one of those cool concepts that different people over the years, because I'd read a little bit about this in preparation, and that curve, that pointy thing, was discussed by Bernoulli and Leibniz. Johann Bernoulli, I should say. There are lots of Bernoullis, aren't there? There's lots of sort of well-known mathematicians who appear. And the other thing I read is that the n=3 case is the Witch of Agnesi, this famous curve.
Yes, and actually that is a exceptionally useful curve if you, like me, find yourself doing a PhD on droplets adhering to surfaces, because it's like, well, it's just a nice equation, looks roughly like a droplet, close enough that it'll do if you're a mathematician and don't really care about the real world.
Yeah.
Good.
That's nice.
Used it a lot. It's sort of seared onto the inside of my eyelids from 4 years of looking at it. You know, Agnesi was actually a woman, though.
Yeah, Maria.
And witch is a mistranslation. Do you know this? It's a weirdly sort of gendered term, but it doesn't mean witch. The Italian doesn't actually mean witch.
Frankly, if someone named something the Witch of Fry, I would be extremely delighted from beyond the grave.
It sounds cool, right? It does sound...
It's very cool.
Like...
It's extremely goth, and I'm all for that.
Yeah, that may be a modern interpretation. At certain times, that may not be a good...
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep dragging things back onto maths here, but the thing that I've noticed about this, because I'm sort of... There's a really nice diagram on Wikipedia that's got all of the different ones for different values that I've just found. And it looks like, because you're saying between 1 and 2, you get these sort of rhombus shapes. So bigger than 2... the corners of the shape are like where you would imagine the corners of a rectangle to be, like on the outside. And as soon as you get less than 2, the corners are now in the middle of the sides because you've got like a rhombusy thing, and then you get these increasingly pointy star shapes, which are slightly reminding me of the episode we did about the spirograph, in the sense that we mainly just spent the whole time trying to out loud describe pictures of things that were really hard to describe out loud, which is essentially what we let ourselves in for in this podcast. But you know, it was especially good in that episode. But it's that sort of, is it like a hypotrochoid, or one of the cool names that they've got for the shapes you get on a spirograph? But I guess this is the four-pronged.
Yeah, but those midpoints on the side, that's why your egg is stackable, because there's a point in the middle of the side, which is as though it was a cube or a cuboid.
Yeah, totally. I think if you, essentially there's a point where the derivative is 0, right? And then that flatness increases as the exponent goes up.
That's such a nice family of shapes. It's always good to like and to sort of see things that you've seen in separate places, but that they're all actually part of a family, and you can just vary a parameter and you've suddenly got all of them. It's like the time when I discovered that broccoli is in the same family as cabbage. Like they're all brassica. Like, just like the tiny little like round bits on the end of broccoli are the same construction as a cabbage head, and like everything in between, they're all different. Like sprouts are on the same scale but different size. It feels like that.
It's just less things to thank when you write your list of gratitude at the end of your life.
All brassica, tick.
Exactly.
All super ellipses, tick. Done. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, because the circle's in there as well, right? And all ellipses. I mean,
and
this is like a category above. The genus superellipse.
Do we know much about Lamé?
French is all I've got.
The only thing is, I looked up, so Lamé, the dates are 1795 to 1870. He was a French mathematician. He's one of the 72 names they put on the Eiffel Tower.
Cool.
Which is 72 scientists, engineers and mathematicians, all of whom are men. And I saw that it said on Wikipedia, the list has been criticised for excluding the name of Sophie Germain, a French mathematician whose work on elasticity was used in the construction of the tower. Like, come on!
Oh, classic.
I did once pitch I don't know if I should share this, but anyway, I did once pitch a TV show which was about sort of retribution for unrecognised brilliant people. And one of the suggestions was to storm the Eiffel Tower, go up to the first floor and basically like unroll a giant poster with her name on it.
Right.
Like match it into the side so that nobody noticed for a really long time. Weirdly, no one wanted to pay for that. I don't know.
It's worth it. You could crowdfund it.
I think we probably could. I'd be brave enough to do it. I would 100% be the person to unroll it. Just sneak it through security.
Be harder to keep it a secret who'd done it if you did have a big website with a big campaign to fund the cost of it. But
you know, these feel like small hurdles.
Other than that, it's PDs and I don't know. I don't have anything particular to say about.
The one thing I would say, actually, about Lame is he's quite difficult to Google because every time you Google it just comes up with lame. I am sometimes a bit sad that I was born now and not in the 1700s when you could just literally spend your entire life mucking around with the equation for a circle and then be a renowned mathematician who gets their name on the side of the Eiffel Tower as a result of it. I mean, it's much harder now, isn't it?
Yeah, this is one of the things I struggle with because if I'm trying to explain to like students that maths is an active subject, that's research is ongoing, and they're like, "Oh yeah, what are they doing then?" And I'm like,
"Okay, sit down for 4 years."
Yeah, I know. Whereas, like, if you talk about what they were doing in, ancient Greece or in, 16th century Europe, you can just explain it in really simple terms. Like, this is what this person did, and they were very clever. And nowadays, I'm like, so I can get you to the start of my PhD in 2 hours.
I know, it's so true.
And then the incredibly tiny amount of research I did will take me another hour.
Is maths the only subject that's true of? I mean, sciences, I guess, where you have like hierarchical knowledge. But like, it doesn't feel as though philosophy, I mean, sort of modern philosophers, it feels like you can still understand what it is that they're doing. It doesn't feel like philosophy has got sequentially more and more difficult to understand on an entry level. Or has it? Maybe I just don't know enough philosophy.
This is getting into the territory of three mathematicians talking about other subjects, isn't it? But there's something about mathematics doesn't sort of go away. It's not like the new theory displaces the old theory in any sort of meaningful way. If it was proven to the ancient Greeks, it's still proven. And so there's always going to be this kind of additive quality to it, isn't it? Where your boundary of knowledge is getting further and further away.
I'd imagine for philosophers it's gotten to the point now where they're like, oh, I've had this new idea, and someone's just like, nope, that's been done. That was this person 300 years ago. Oh, okay, right, I'll keep thinking. Yeah.
Do you think then that, okay, but then where does it end, right? Because I know that's a sentence that immediately makes me want to wish that I hadn't said it. There's never a good way to use that sentence, apart from this one. Because if now we're at a stage where really, I think about halfway through a PhD, you begin to be capable of being an independent mathematician, right? I think that's about the point. Maybe towards the tail end of your PhD. And that's now. In like 100 years' time or 200 years' time, do you have to be a professor before you're capable?
Yeah, I worry about this a lot because we have undergraduate projects, and I've worked at one point. I worked in a school of science, and they would say that an undergraduate project ought to have some pushing at the frontier, even if it's like a small bit of the supervisor's main research topic or something. And the mathematicians would often say, "Oh no, that's not going to happen in a sort of 3-month undergraduate project or something like this." And so, but presumably once it could have, and as you say, you could have in the choose a decade in the last few hundred years, and you get people who are sort of amateurs playing around with bits of number theory and things like this who are able to do astonishing things. So is that getting pushed back further and further, or is that just an artifact of where we're sitting in time looking at it, feeling a bit strange? I don't know. It also gets you into weird questions about, like, mathematics is a weird bunch of subjects, really, if you think about it. There's a weird bunch of stuff that we call mathematics that happens to include a bunch of different topics, and at different points in history that's been different. So there's a lot of stuff that used to be called mathematics, which is now astronomy or geography, or, there are loads of subjects that have spun off. More recently, computer science sort of spun off from mathematics, and I wonder whether that's a sort of process that will keep going.
I also wonder whether it's about teamwork versus individual work, because I think that there used to be room for sort of the lone genius, as it were. But I think now that actually this is, I think, particularly true in science, and I think increasingly true of mathematics too. But actually, increasingly, the big breakthroughs are coming from people pooling their resources and their ideas together, rather than just people working in their attic for 7 years and coming out with Fermat's last theorem.
Yeah.
I also sort of wonder if the thing that's going to come to the rescue here is combinatorics, because if you take two unrelated bits of maths and combine them and try and find something new, that can often be not just a fruitful area of research, but also you don't need to be as well versed in both of them to make progress with it. It can be like, oh, there's a load of low-hanging fruit here because no one's thought about these two things together before. And if you look at the number of different areas of maths and then the number of different combinations of areas of maths, that's quite a big field to go at if people want to do that kind of thing. And there's a lot of nice stuff comes out of that sort of thing. Like my PhD was in dynamical systems and topology, so it was like my supervisor was just sort of pulling together all these different areas of maths and grabbing PhD students from other parts of maths to work on his problems with him, and it was really fun. It was really interesting. So maybe that's a way to continue doing more maths, is just mashups.
Yeah, well, that was the big thing of that Nature paper recently. Did you see the mathematics paper from DeepMind? They took two different areas, knot theory and I think algebraic geometry, and essentially used a purpose-built AI to look for connections and patterns between them, and then sort of used those areas to sort of highlight whether there were some interesting connections, and then had the mathematicians go off and prove the conjectures. But I agree with you. I think it is the mashups is where there's still plenty of room.
Mm.
I think the lone genius thing can be overdone, though, because Jackie Steckles wrote this really nice book called The History of Mathematics, A Very Short Introduction, and she uses Wiles as an example in that, and she talks about how he's the lone genius, and he locked himself away in the attic and he did Fermat's last theorem, and very good. But she makes the point, he was educated at Oxford and Cambridge, he worked at Harvard, Bonn, Princeton and Paris, all of which had these mathematical communities. He did speak to colleagues. He spoke to Nick Katz for part of the proof. He asked Barry Mazur to check the proof before he presented it. The finished proof was then checked by 6 people as part of the peer review process. And when an error was found, he worked with a student of his to fix it. And she says, in all the years he worked on the proof, he never stopped teaching students, he never stopped attending departmental seminars. So this idea that you just sort of lock yourself away and somebody occasionally brings you some food and then you produce mathematics is, he's part of a community, and, everybody is. And even going back, she uses that example because it gets you to Fermat, and Fermat is this isolated person, but he's corresponding with other mathematicians of the day, and he's reading Greek texts and he's building on them and things. And sort of all through time, we have this idea of the mathematician in the sort of ivory tower doing the thing, but actually it's a little bit of a fiction all the way through.
Yeah,
I really like that. I think that's very important. I also think that the lone genius idea can be really problematic for students coming through, because I think that it adds to this illusion that unless you are gifted and sort of the kind of person who can solve these things without really even trying, unless you are Goodwill Hunting, then you don't belong. Whereas actually the vast majority of mathematicians I've ever met have been people who think that it's 99% frustration and then 1% inspiration.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah, for bringing your Superegg to show us. And if people want to find out more about you or see more of you talking about other bits of maths, where can they do that?
I'm just going to go off and make a super quiche with it. I am on Twitter, Fright R Squared, and Instagram, same handle. Or if you sit still long enough, I'm sure I'll appear. I'm like Rust. I get everywhere.
Yeah, it often happens to me that I'm just watching the telly and I'm like, oh, Hannah's on the telly again. Yeah,
I know. Sorry,
excellent.
Can't get away from it. It's specifically you, though, Casey. I'm stalking you and your habits, and no, I'm on no one else's TV. I've just worked out how to override your particular system.
I actually don't mind. That's great. It's much appreciated. Excellent. We are also both on Twitter, so I am at Steckles.
And I'm at Peter Rowlett, and the podcast itself is at Maths Objects.
And both Peter and I blog at a website called aperiodical.com, which is where you can find more episodes of this podcast.
And if you have any thoughts or suggestions or want to suggest an object that we could do an episode about, you can email us objects@aperiodical.com. The music is Funk Game Loop by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons. So, do you want to ask a prompting question?
Yeah, okay. Well, that is the worst.
Yeah. Yes. The question is, where can listeners to the Mathematical Objects podcast who've never heard of Hannah Fry find out more about you? Which is a nonsense question.
Go on, just say that. Let's do that.